All right, how's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week on the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name is Josh, and thanks for joining me on this week's episode for the week of February 27th. Last episode of the month of February, I guess, but despite February being such a short month, I felt like there was some decent tracks that dropped this month overall. And if you're new to Best and Worst Track of the Week, thanks for tuning in. All it is a show where I take all the new entries into the Billboard Hot 100 and grade each one with a letter grade and pick one that's the worst, pick one that's the best. I do that every week. And for instance, last week, best track ended up being by Tjay and 21 Savage, Box of Churches, and worst track of the week ended up being by Dan and Tjay. Don't even remember the song title, I just remember that song was pretty bad. But yeah, overall, this week in comparison, kind of lukewarm overall. We're covering some artists that we haven't really ever covered or covered in a while. Rascal Flats, Giveon. Last time I even heard something was off of a Drake track in the summer. A few tracks from him. Nipsey Hussle, Jay-Z, Dua Lipa, Taylor Swift, amongst another artist or two. But yeah, that's sort of the week we have. And if you're new to the Music Reviewer, all it is just a podcast where I like talking about music. I give album reviews semi-frequently. So if you're ever interested in listening to some thoughts on some recently released albums, go ahead and check out some of the back catalog that's going back to like about late April or just about April last year. But yeah, overall, I thought this week was pretty standard. I didn't think anything was god-awful or terrible, so that's always a good thing. But I also really wasn't blown away or that excited by any particular track that dropped. So pretty middle-of-the-road week. Last week, kind of sort of the same. I did end up liking that best track that dropped. It ended up being Tjay and 21 Savage, Box of Churches, versus Dan and Tjay with the worst track of the week. And just before we get started, I just want to let everyone know a new episode of the album review series dropped. Episode 48 was Arlo Parks, Collapsed in Sunbeams. I thought that was a pretty great album. Overall, a nice blend of like some indie, R&B, and soul. Yeah, check the album out if you have some time. And also check out the review if you're wanting to hear my thoughts on that album. So yeah, overall, some highlights this week of the week of February 27th. Driver's License still at number 1 by Olivia Rodrigo. I was kind of getting to the notion that it's a pretty massive track. I think this consistency of it being at number 1 already for several weeks already. Let's see how many weeks for 6 weeks on the chart. I don't know how long it's been at number 1, but it's been at number 1 for most of those weeks. So yeah, this track is here to stay for a while. Don't know how long it's going to be at that number 1 position, but it's definitely going to be in the public eye and then just culturally relevant, I think, for quite some time. 34 plus 35 by Ariana Grande at number 2 this week. I guess that remix that dropped a couple weeks ago really helped her out with this track, and I guess it has some steam going forward. We have a interesting new entry this week, Calling My Phone by Lil Tjay at number 3. Pretty high debut. Don't know really where it's going to go from here. We'll talk about that track later. A surprise here, Cardi B with Up at number 5. I think it was number 2 last week. So number 5, Ipping at number 5. I guess I can't say that's terrible, but honestly, I was kind of expecting it to, with it being a Cardi B track, to maybe stay at number 2 at least, but who knows. And then also some other highlights, Therefore I Am by Billie Eilish up to 13, so thought that track was actually dying by now, but it looks like it still has some traction. You Broke Me First by Tate McRae going up to 23. Covered that track by now a couple months ago, but it's been lingering around, and it's finally cracked the top quarter of the charts. Wouldn't be surprised if this actually ends up getting higher and being a huge breakout hit for that artist if it hasn't already. In a similar vein, Put Your Records On by Rit Momney, up to 39. Another track that's just been lingering around for some time already. I don't know really what to think about this. I wasn't too sold on the cover. It's not terrible, but I really don't know how this is also having such high upward trajectory, because in my opinion, it's really not better than the original. If we're being honest, and I think it's at this point bigger than the original. I'll just say that. My Head and My Heart by Ava Max, up to 61. We covered up the last week. I wasn't like too, I liked the track, but I just wasn't too crazy about it. In terms of like it being one of the better Ava Max tracks I've heard, but hey, it's going up. Maybe this will be good for the Ava Max for the coming weeks. Heat Waves by Glass Animals up to 64. Glad to see that happening. Don't really know what to expect here. I feel like it can still maybe go up a bit and maybe linger around, but with it being such an old track from like the summer already, I wouldn't be surprised if this dies soon already. And then also some dropouts. Rockstar by DaBaby and Roddy Ricch is out. That was a massive hit this summer. And then also terrible week for Morgan Wallen. He had several dropouts and also drops on the chart itself. So no surprise there, but that was kind of just what I noticed was going on. First track this week, new entry, How They Remember You by Rascal Flatts, came in at 100. Don't think we've ever really talked about Rascal Flatts. If we did, I totally forgot the track that I even covered. Interestingly enough, last week when I did that Dan and Shay track review, I compared Dan and Shay to Rascal Flatts, and I'm sorry I did that. Even though my logic was, I guess, still kind of solid, the point I was making, but Rascal Flatts is just a cut above anything Dan and Shay would ever do. These dudes are just professionals at this. Yes, they're maybe not the most cutting edge country act out right now, or by this point their sound is a bit stale, or I guess their better days are behind them. But I was surprised. I dug this track here. It was an interesting sound. I expected by now they'd be selling out to typical bro country aesthetics, but on this track that's definitely not the case. There's an interesting marching beat style that structures the verses on this track. It's pretty unique, and especially in a country track. It kind of sounds overall like a feel-good late to mid 2000s to late 2000s country music, which I guess was their bread and butter at the time. They're still kind of doing that sort of thing. It leans a bit on like standard rock country stylization, especially when we get to like a moment on the track where we get a predictable guitar solo bit. The track overall isn't bad. Has a decent message, some nice guitar work all throughout the track as well. I give it a B. Next track was Like I Want You by Giveon at number 95. I don't really know anything about this artist, I'm going to be honest. I remember they sang a hook on like one of these Drake tracks that released from that demo this summer, Dark Lane demo tapes. But now that I hear some solo material, I don't know really what to think, but to me it just sounds a lot like this R&B style a la Sam Smith, to be blunt. And this track, it was the better of the two that we covered this week from Giveon. It's like a slow jam R&B style. I dig the funky guitar chords that embellish this track. In my opinion, at least it sounds a little bit more sophisticated than like something an artist like Khalid would do. His voice just sounds a bit unusual in the context of like this contemporary pop and R&B music. For some reason, Giveon's voice is, I kind of got to it later, on the other track, but I'll just say it now. He sounds a bit like Joji. But in my opinion, the music is nowhere near as interesting as like some of the shit that Joji's doing. But I will say this track, Like I Want You, is miles ahead of what I've heard recently from an artist like Sam Smith. So that's technically not a bad thing. The track does lose some steam as it progresses, and it's not as climatic as I would have wanted it to be. I thought it was okay. I gave it a B-. Also, the track just kind of doesn't sound anything too characteristic Also, the track just kind of doesn't sound like anything too characteristic of like what's on the Billboard Hot 100 right now. So it's unique in a sense. Nice sensitive bass line all throughout. I love the drum track on here, actually. I thought that was probably the best part of the track. Next track was Astronaut in the Ocean by Masked Wolf at 68. I will be honest, this is probably the most interesting track I've covered in a while. Just in terms of like what intrigued me. I won't say that it was necessarily like the best or worst thing I've heard. Especially since when I saw something like Masked Wolf, I wasn't really expecting to hear a rapper, but this is an Australian rapper that I think is up and coming from the brief research I've done. And I don't know. I was expecting something really like an EDM artist, hyperpop artists, or maybe even, hell, I was being optimistic, a rock artist. But yeah, when I first heard this track, I thought this was a complete rip-off of Drake's entire aesthetic, especially like the first like 20 seconds of the track. I was like, nice of you to show up, Drake. But anyways, I was a bit disappointed this was a rapper, but I did listen to it a couple times. Not saying it's great, but it did grow on me a bit more than other tracks this week. But it just kind of sounds like on the level of like some shit that you think Jake Paul would throw on to get hyped up. It's like that level of like sophistication or lack of sophistication. Some Eminem influence on here, especially like on the second verse. The flow he uses is very Eminem-like. He shows off some of the chops he has. But I will say the production here is kind of where the track loses me. The instrumental is a bit buried, especially when we get any much-needed melodic material. It doesn't pop out or make the track particularly any more interesting. And I hate how the track ends. It's very abrupt and incomplete, so I gave this track a C. Next track was We're Good by Dua Lipa at 49. I'll just say it right off the bat. This just doesn't sound like a typical Dua Lipa track. The first time it was a bit of a disappointment. Did grow on me a little bit more second time I heard it. But right away, the instrumental sounds like a complete ripoff of like Lana Del Rey's Summertime remix by Sublime, or vice versa, the Summertime track that was remixed by Lana Del Rey. The instrumental, very similar, and the vibe is just very, I guess, carbon copied. At least in the verses and the opening material of this track. But the track does change into an interesting direction where we get like this elongated anticipatory build up on like this pre-chorus chorus section. The track is just confusing in my opinion. It just feels like very blocky with the song structure and how each different section of the track sounds a bit like different songs that were put together but weren't necessarily transitioned very well into each other. So I give this track a C. Also, it sounds like Pink. Next track, Love Story by Taylor Swift at 11. If you're confused, yes, that is Love Story by the Taylor Swift, but this is, I guess, a re-recorded version. From my lack of understanding, I don't really know exactly what's going on, but I think Taylor's redoing re-recordings of older tracks that she doesn't necessarily have the ownership to in order to do something with them. I have no idea really what that is, but Love Story ended up being like the first one of this happening. And I will give some backstory, what the hell. Love Story came out, I guess, when I was like in high school. Taylor, especially back then, was sort of a guilty pleasure. She wasn't an artist I would literally be into if I was just telling people what I listened to. But I did appreciate a lot of Taylor Swift's early work, especially from that first debut album and this one, which what's the name of the album? Fearless. Love Story, nonetheless, was a massive hit. It changed her career. It made her a juggernaut, or it gave her trajectory to gain the status that she ended up having. This track is essentially the same. Like it has a lot of the charm of the original cut. Some more rougher and live instrumentation that brightens it up. I guess I actually kind of like that of the track. I like the fiddle being put on the forefront of this cut as well. It makes it, like I said, feel a little bit more rustic or rougher. But it isn't really changed up too much. Taylor sounds almost exactly the same as the original recording. The subtleties are quite nice though, but it's, it doesn't really feel too much different from the original track. But the original track is a classic, so I gave this track a B+. Next track was Calling My Phone by Lil Tjay Black, with a 6 in front of it. Don't know if that's really how you say the artist's name, but that came in at number 3. This was a confusing track. For one, how did it get to number 3? Like, did this shit just blow up on TikTok? I'm not on that app very much, so maybe. Don't really know what's going on with its relevance. Don't really know too much about Lil Tjay other than he was on Pop Smoke's album that came out last year, and he was on probably the worst track on that album, and he ruined the track. And then I don't really know much of Black's music, to be honest, but together they're not awful. This track definitely has a sort of R&B, alt R&B, dark like aesthetic to it, very similar to like something you'd hear Jhené Aiko on. My first problem was this track is that I didn't know who was who, but I guess it's like more of like a Lil Tjay track. He opens up the track and he's on the hook. He sounds more nasally. I will say I do prefer Black's more smoother approach and delivery. And he just blends in a little bit more with the beat and instrumental. And the track just kind of limits itself when they utilize this stupid chipmunk sample hook bit over and over and over again. And it just happens so many times on this track, and it doesn't really do anything to make the track particularly any more interesting. It doesn't color it or anything in a particular way. It just kind of the track's a bit stagnant. It doesn't really build to anything. I thought it was okay. Give it a C. But that's it for the regular tracks. Now we're at the part where I go over the best and worst track. We always start on the worst track to end on a positive note. Worst track this week was Heartbreak Anniversary by Giveon at 74. Now, I don't really think this track is bad, but I think it just didn't really provide anything all that interesting. I just didn't really enjoy listening to it. Now, this is a track where I kind of came into the realization who Giveon's reminding me to. At first, I said it was Sam Smith. It kind of borrows his aesthetic a bit. But the second time I listened to it, it was obvious. It was Joji. Although I don't think Joji would really put himself on anything this bare or uninspiring, especially on this instrument. The track is just kind of very limited, especially with the sound palette that's going on. It's structured around these held out piano chords that are just held out every measure, and it's very predictable and bare. The track does go for some, more, I guess, characterization with like this Prince-like metallic funky guitar thing that, is just kind of a relic at this point, but it makes the track a little bit cooler. But I will say just like there's really not much energy going on in this track. Giveon's performance is not bad per se, but the drum track on here is just very wimpy. It doesn't really hit, especially in comparison to that other track we have by Giveon this week. And it just, it's just very lukewarm, I'd say. It's like, eating a meal that, you, are just kind of doing it to, get the nutritional value from, but, there's really, nothing else to take from it. But anyway, on to the best track of the week. This week, best track of the week, went to that collab, What It Feels Like, by Nipsey Hussle and Jay-Z. Overall, I think this track kind of just won for just being the most solid thing this week. It's not necessarily an amazing, once in a lifetime sort of track. Not that it's supposed to be, but I kind of say it a lot most weeks. It's kind of won by default. The only thing that came close was Taylor Swift Love Story, but I couldn't really justify giving Taylor Swift best track over this, because this is a really good cut. R.I.P. to Nipsey Hussle. I will admit I was never knowledgeable of his existence or his music. I'm sure at some point I might have ran into one of a feature or a track from him. But it's pretty cool that we have this collab with Jay-Z. Jay-Z's not really quite the big, name or relevant name that he once was. He's still certainly one of the best rappers in the game right now, or, just depending on how you feel about Jay-Z of all time, possibly. But I'm digging the grandiose nature on this instrumental. Most of all, some great West Coast-like production. Nipsey has a pretty good flow on here. Nice presence, natural feeling. Just definitely fits well into the track, and I think Jay-Z fits in quite nicely as well. They don't really try outshining each other. I don't really know when this track was recorded either. If it was like in the midst of like he was recording the song like in the midst of like his untimely death, or if this was just on the back burner for some time and it was just never really quite released. I should have done more research on that front, but it's an authentic sounding track. Nice held out and buzzy bass notes in the beat that support everything. Nice soulful vocals thrown in towards the end as well. It's a pretty outro. So it's just a solid, rap song overall. It's like some rap that you don't really get either on the charts anymore. It's definitely not really a trap sounding or trap influence type sounding track. It's definitely holds true to, I guess, more, established rap roots, if you will. I don't want to get hierarchical here, but that's just kind of what it was. That was best track of the week. And if you stuck with me to the end of this episode, thanks for tuning in this week on the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name is Josh. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you have some time. Also, listen to some other episodes if you're digging the podcast. Leave some feedback, good and bad, good or bad. And also subscribe on your preferred listening or streaming service. So I'll see you guys soon. Tune in next week or for another album review soon. I'll see you guys later.